share the story of Luke Masella with you. Luke Masella was diagnosed with spina bifida. This is a disorder from birth that paralyzes the bladder. By the time Luke was 10 years old, his kidney was failing, his blood was filled with toxins, and he had lost 25% of his body weight. At this point, his parents and doctors decided they would create a new bladder for him from scratch. Now, this probably sounds like science fiction, but this is a true story reported in Newsweek. Luke is now 20 years old and he's living a healthy and happy and full life. So how is this possible? This is possible through the use of stem cells. So in this talk, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what stem cells are, where they come from, and how they're used. So first of all, what are stem cells? These are like the body's raw building material. They're basically cells that can become any other type of cell in the body. Now, most cells that we have are already differentiated, meaning that they can only be one specific thing. Stem cells are before that stage where they can be turned into anything that the body needs. So next question is, where do these cells come from? So the most natural state is the embryonic stem cells. These are stem cells usually taken from an embryo that is left over from in vitro fertilization. Now, these are the most versatile, but they're also controversial in that they have the possibility of becoming human life. So people are opposed to destroying them to get stem cells from them. There was actually a ban in 2001 by President Bush against federal funding for embryonic stem cells. This was repealed in 2009 by President Obama, but it still remains the source of stem cells with the least amount of research. Now, another source is cord blood, which is blood taken from the umbilical cord after birth. Now, unfortunately, most of this is being discarded by hospitals, but there has been a push recently to start preserving this. Another source of stem cells is adult stem cells. Stem cells are actually found in the body in places that undergo a lot of regeneration, such as the skin or bone marrow. Researchers are also finding it in lesser quantities in other places. Now, adult stem cells were thought to be less versatile in that they could only be a specific thing that that area of the body needed. But more recently, researchers have been successful in altering these stem cells with chemicals to become pretty much anything. Now, there's also a couple of techniques to take regular cells and revert them to stem cells. One of these techniques is called somatic cell nuclear transfer. This is done by taking a nucleus from a regular cell and placing it into a human egg cell. Problem with this is that it's controversial, like the embryos, because you're basically making a new human embryo like this. The other technique is called induced pluripotent stem cells. These are taking regular cells and genetically modifying them. The problem with this is that it's not always very successful. They generally succeed about 1 in 10,000 cells. So now we know what stem cells are, where they come from, so how are they used? So one way is like we had the story in the beginning. They're being used to create artificial organs. Now, the problem with a medical problem has always been with organs that they're risky and that they run the risk of rejection. Also, there's a shortage of organs for people who need them. There aren't enough donors. So now, using stem cells, in the case of Luke that we mentioned in the beginning, they used his own stem cells and created a bladder from those, so there was no risk of rejection. What they do is they make an artificial scaffolding to build the organ around. They then place the stem cells in the scaffolding, and the stem cells pretty much take care of everything by themselves. They hook up their own blood supply, they bring in their own nerves. This has traditionally been a stumbling block to create artificial organs. Now, another use for stem cells is for curing diseases and injuries. It's being commonly used to cure anemia and leukemia. Basically, they bring in stem cells to replace the damaged cells. There's also, as reported in Discover, there's a trial going on of curing paralysis in humans by replacing their damaged nerves with stem cells. This has already been successful in mice and rats, and they're trying it now on humans. Another use is to study diseases. Time magazine reports that there's a study done on Lou Gehrig's disease. They took a patient who had Lou Gehrig's disease. They took his stem cells from his skin and created neurons from them. And they observed the neurons and observed the disease taking place, and they were able to discover that the disease doesn't actually affect the neurons. It affects the support cells around the neurons. So they reached a new understanding of how the disease works, which brings us one step closer to curing it. So now we know what stem cells are, where they come from, how they're used. I'd like to close with this thought from Douglas Melton, who's a stem cell researcher at Harvard University. He says, quote, "In the absence of disease, why would we die? With stem cells, can we get control of the aging process?" Unquote. So the idea here is that using stem cells, if we can replace any damaged or aging cell in the body, we might be able to retard aging in general. So using stem cells, one day the fountain of youth might become a reality.